From the southeastern corner of western North Carolina, this is Folklore. I'm your host, James Hernishin. When my wife and I were thinking about moving to Saluda about 19 years ago, my first thought was, sounds great, but does it have high-speed internet? If the answer was no, it would have been a deal breaker. Among other things, I need a decent internet connection to work, and as attractive as Saluda and the rest of Polk County is, making a living without that connection simply wasn't going to happen. Fortunately, a few seconds on the internet connection in our apartment back in Vancouver was all it took to find out that yes, Saluda did have high-speed service. Of course, back then high-speed was measured in single digits of megabits per second. Today, thanks to the fiber-optic lines that run through the city, we can get 100 times that. Not everyone in Polk County is so lucky. My Facebook feed includes almost daily complaints from someone whose service is either too slow or too unreliable to justify the cost, which can run upwards of $100 a month just for basic service. As our experience during the first year and a half of the COVID pandemic proves, there are a lot of students and their families out there who haven't been served well by the commercial internet providers, who don't like to run lines to lightly populated areas of the country where the return on profit is marginal. According to the Foothills Regional Commission, a third of the households in Polk County don't have a broadband connection. Most of them are in Green Creek, Sunnyview, Mill Spring, basically anywhere outside of the three big towns. A lot of them would love to take advantage of the $30 a month subsidy that the Biden administration managed to convince Congress to pass last year and sign up for decent internet at a bargain price. But the fact is, you can't use a subsidy if there's nothing to buy. And Polk County is not alone. Plenty of rural counties in this country have abysmal internet service. But things are getting better. The fiber optic line through Saluda that let my wife and I hold separate Zoom video conferences while my son did the same thing simultaneously during that wonderful experience known as remote learning, not too long ago, was made possible by Obama administration grants to RiverStreet, our internet provider. There were plans to expand that service further, but program funding dried up when the Trump administration took over in 2016. Now, the state of North Carolina is finally recognizing that the free market isn't up to the task of treating internet access as an essential need. Among the biggest boosters of using taxpayer dollars to expand broadband service is Polk County's representative in the State House, Jake Johnson. He was more than happy to talk about his work on that subject. Our conversation is full of acronyms and references to obscure government programs, but I think you'll still learn a few things about what's coming down the proverbial pipeline. You might also learn a few things about Jake Johnson and his approach to politics. But before we get to the interview, I want to make it clear that we didn't agree beforehand to avoid more controversial topics, like Jake's sponsorship of House Bill 43, which would make it illegal for doctors to help trans youth switch from one sex to another. I just wanted to talk about broadband specifically because it's one of the few subjects that doesn't seem to get bogged down in the culture wars. And I think that was a good decision. We managed to talk for almost an hour without either of us using a certain word that begins with W and rhymes with joke. For an interview between a progressive podcaster and a Republican politician in 2023, I call that a win. I fully intend to pursue subjects like House Bill 43 in the future, but for now, let's just remember that constructive dialogue has to begin somewhere. Jake and I spoke a few days ago in a conference room above the House of Flags Museum in Columbus. Jake Johnson, welcome to Folklore. I'm so glad you found the time to talk because I think this is one of the most important issues that affects a large number of people in Polk County. A lot of people have different issues, different things that they care about, but access to the internet has become essential. So tell me why you have made improving access to broadband internet one of your legislative priorities.
Yeah, and thanks for having me on, James. I appreciate it. And really what put this on my radar is one, personal experience growing up here. I was born and raised in, we had a Saluda address, but grew up on Halbert's Cove, kind of, we'll say dead center of nowhere, not to the left or right, but dead center of nowhere. And the internet service was not great growing up. And if it gives you any idea where my age is, I do remember my mom saying, "Get off the computer so I can call grandma." So I remember back when that was the level of technology we had. and long before the high-speed fiber days and things like that. So, and then when I was county commissioner here in Polk County, I was elected in 2016, served until my appointment in 2019. That was always a heavy topic of conversation for rural counties. And across the state, not just in Polk County. We go to the Association of County Commissioner conferences and things like that. I began to see that it was a problem I had personally experienced and people in my community were experiencing, but it was a much larger issue across the state that, frankly, hadn't been invested in at the level that it needed to. So just naturally, when I got to Raleigh, that was a heavy priority for me and still is today.
So you're old enough to remember the sound of dial-up with.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I don't even know how to describe that sound now to, people younger than me that don't. It's like you're speaking a foreign language when you're talking about dial-up and what we have to go through. You couldn't use the phone and the computer at the same time, and I remember that. And it was funny. Back then when the speed increased marginally, just a little bit, it was like a world of difference. And now we're talking about speeds that you couldn't even fathom back then. So it's crazy to see the technology.
You might argue that if you choose to live in a rural environment, you don't get all the advantages of an urban environment. And in not too distant past, good internet speed was an urban thing. That's no longer true anymore. And for me, the lesson really came home during the COVID period. Now, we're really lucky. We have fiber optic service in Saluda. So my son was able to go virtual in school without any real decline in academic performance. And in some ways, of course, he enjoyed being able to schedule his time and video games at some times and school at others. I was talking with Aaron Green, the superintendent, and he pointed out that there's a whole heck of a lot of kids in Polk County who don't have that kind of access. And so it's no longer something that only people in cities should expect, right?
Yeah. And access to internet is something that touches, and it was brought out during COVID, but we've known for years that's one of the one issues that touches everything from economic development, education, healthcare. Telehealth has become extremely popular. Folks not wanting to go to the hospital if they don't absolutely have to, or go to their primary care physician if they don't absolutely have to, doing the telehealth. And we have a higher retiree population here. That was a huge point of focus. And people move into this area, expanding housing markets, I truly think we're moving toward a time where when you're buying a house or something, one of the first questions, okay, where's the water coming from? Where's the power? Where's the sewer? And usually the next question is, what's the internet source? And I think we're moving toward a time where those are all becoming more equal. And when you're looking at, who are my providers for these things and how am I going to get these services? We see internet being asked right there with water, sewer, and power when people are moving here.
So did you identify this issue as right off the bat when you first joined the House of Representatives?
Yes. So I actually chair the IT Appropriations Committee, and you don't chair things your first term there, but I expressed an interest, and some of the guys that have been there longer and started making those initial investments in the GREAT Grant program, which is probably our most popular and most well-known broadband program, and I can explain that a little bit too. But the folks that have been working on that, I immediately jumped in with them and said, this is something that I'm passionate about that would help my entire district. At the time, my district was all of Polk, a good portion of Henderson County, and Transylvania County. It's now a portion of Henderson, all of Polk, part of Rutherford, and part of McDowell. But still all areas that struggle when it comes to being able to run internet places. So that was something. There was very little downtime there. When we got in, we knew this was an issue we wanted to go dive headfirst into. And since then, we have seen a historic investment, and I don't use the word historic lightly. The past investment was $150 million over 10 years, which you extrapolate that out, that's $10 million or $15 million a year. It's a drop in the bucket. This past year in the budget, we were a primary sponsor on the funding package that was about $1 billion, and it was as quick as we could get it out. Pretty much is how we wanted to phrase it. It was really a 2 to 5 year build out, depending on when the contract was awarded. But we just rolled out the first nearly $300 million of that. We still have about $70 million in GREAT to contract out. Then there's another $450 million in a new program called Completing Access to Broadband, CAB. and then another $100 million in a program called the Accelerator Get Ready program or Make Ready program to partner with co-ops to run high-speed fiber along their lines above ground. Yeah. It's a lot to unpack.
Yeah, well, that's a lot of money. That's state money, right?
Yes,
okay, well, let's get a little bit political here, because the need for access to internet has been around for quite a while. In 2012, the Obama administration freed up a lot of money for expanding. In Saluda, for instance, RiverStreet Networks took that federal money and wired most of the town and a lot of other areas. Well, that money basically evaporated with the Obama administration. The Trump years, there was no money from the federal government. And at the state level, a lot of states, especially Republican-controlled states, have been very hostile to the notion of, say, municipalities running their own internet services. And I guess my question is, why is that changing? Why have states, Republican states, and some other individual politicians kind of figured out now that the internet is really important when it has been for quite a while?
Yeah, and the RDOF funds that come down from the federal government, those have been, we make our decisions based off state money, and we say what the federal government's going to do, what the federal government's going to do. We have to make the best decisions here. And I'm glad you brought up the municipality issue, because that has historically been with counties and cities, and also the Association of County Commissioners is in that boat, have said we want more control over where these lines are ran. Even if we're not necessarily the provider, we want to say so in how these are ran. And there was a big, and this was before my time, back in the day with electricities and things like that, really gave people a bad taste in their mouth when municipalities got into running utilities. A couple defunct and went bankrupt, and the state had to come in, and it really it left a very timid feeling about municipalities being the provider. So what we did with the CAB program, this is brand new. So this is nothing the state's ever done before, and frankly, it's kind of, I don't even know any other states handling it the way we do. So GREAT program is initiated by the provider. Those are the ones people are probably most familiar with, to where the provider submits an application. And I'll use Polk as an example because that's where we're sitting. The county actually is matching funds to help providers leverage more money and score higher. So on the scoring mechanism, if you have buy-in from the county, here Polk County, great investment by the commissioners, were able to leverage $250,000 to get $13 million. So very good return on investment there. And a lot of that is money coming directly from the providers who win the contracts. So CAB program is totally the opposite. It is the county initiating it, saying, we know, because we're elected here and we're the closest to the people, we know there's an area here that needs help. We know that this is an area that's not been covered under the GREAT grants. We don't want to dually award. We want to hit areas that are not reached yet. We know this area is not reached. We've got a provider that borders this area that with more money could run the extra mile and get into this unserved area. And then they go, the provider agrees to work with the county. They come to the state and apply together for that grant. So we're really excited. That's $450 million. That's a pretty sizable chunk of money.
Well, it does, although there's 10 million people in North Carolina. So it seems to me to have been kind of a shift in the political landscape on this, because, again, in the past, we didn't trust municipalities because, well, some are kind of small and a little bit wonky and, sometimes can't follow through in their long-term commitments. I mean, just here in Polk County, right, we trying to push water up and down the mountain. The county hired someone to build a pipeline. It didn't work out so well. So in a way, internet's very similar. Are you saying that it's better to work with the private sector?
Yes.
Right? You want them heavily involved in this. On the other hand, why not just let the private sector handle this whole thing itself? Clearly, the private sector has not brought internet to the last mile to everyone who needs it. So this is really an example of where faith in the free market kind of doesn't get you everywhere you want to go.
Yeah, and it kind of really strikes the difference between wants and needs. We want a lot of things. We're getting to a point just where we're at in society, we need internet. The same we need water. We need those things. Healthcare, we need those things. And I feel like when we're looking at the way we do it versus other states do it, and I'm not going to claim to be an expert on how any of our even neighboring states do it. What's taken so long is there was actually a federal ruling through the Treasury Department in D.C. That said, and I don't know if it was in the form of a directive or a department directive or how it was administered, but the Biden administration and Secretary Yellen, Secretary of the Treasury, pretty much said you can't give this money, and this is 30,000-foot view, but you can't give this money straight to providers. And we were kind of frozen because, we said this is how we've done it for years. This is how we've, reaching these households. And we've got a very interesting dynamic in North Carolina where it's allocated by the General Assembly, the funds are, and the stipulations to which it will be administered are set in statute. However, it's the governor's appointed Department of Information Technology, a government-appointed department, that administers those funds and sets kind of their criteria for scoring and things like that. So we've got a very bipartisan way of doing it here, or at least we have in the past 4 years. And I will say that I've got a great relationship, especially when it comes to broadband, with the Secretary of Information Technology. He and I meet very often and talk very often about ways we can improve it, speed things up. And his person that's over the broadband office, Nate Denny, he and I talk weekly at the least frequent. Sometimes we're talking multiple times a day. And he's saying, hey, these are the issues we're having. Can we get these cleared up at the state level? We're putting in an inquiry at the federal level to get this cleared up. We got great news yesterday or Tuesday. I chair our IT Appropriations Committee. We invited the department to come present, and they said we got great news from Treasury. They're adjusting that to where we can go ahead and sign the contracts. These providers and counties were really scared to sign those contracts because they were technically in violation of that federal ruling.
That you couldn't give money directly to.
But because we vet it through a Department of Information Technology, they said, okay, we understand why you do it the way you do it. I said, frankly, it's the state's not going out digging the lines. We make sure the provider's legitimate, can meet the criteria that they've promised to be able to meet, and then they do the installation and hire the vendors and things like that. And it's worked wonderfully through the great program. And I said, we want to extend that even for CAB. So Polk County, I'll give you a great example. In the latest maps, which were, take some of them with a grain of salt if it's coming from the FCC. But the latest maps, totally unserved. And this is not, I'm not happy with my service. It could be better. There's lots of that. So, but the totally unserved, I think in Polk was around 5,000, I think, households. That's not people, households. And this new round will hit nearly 3,500 of those. So we're extremely excited to get those contracts signed so we can start breaking ground.
So I can expect to see fewer people on my Facebook feed complaining about their internet service.
I won't make that commitment, but I will say we will reach out. No, we are reaching a ton of those households, and I think it was actually, well over half of the unserved households will be met in this next round. And for the first time, and I think this was very eye-opening for me, I was sitting with the secretary, his chief of staff, and the person over the broadband office, and we're just kind of talking through, and I asked the question. I said, we're throwing a huge amount of money in a budget of $30 billion or something like that. It was a little more last year because of the federal money, but I said, what are we? What does success look like if we keep allocating these huge chunks of money? And they said one day we won't need these programs. One day we will not see a great grant program anymore because we've realistically met all the ones we can expect to get to, and the rest will have to be picked up by satellite and things like that in the new technology we're seeing there. So that was very eye-opening for me. So for the first time, it was someone had said it, success is not needing these programs anymore, that we've reached everyone we can tangibly reach.
There are several different options for people who want a decent internet service. I was talking to a friend of mine up in Canada who he was working way up near the Arctic. And so for his company, he bought a Starlink off of Elon Musk's company. Mm-hmm. Cost about $600 in hardware, and it's $110, $120 a month for acceptable service. That's a bit more than most people want to shell out. I mean, most companies will give you the modem for free, right, as a part of your service. So satellite, still a little bit pricey for people. And by the way, you can't get Starlink in Polk County. The whole Southeast is, Elon hasn't gotten around to it.
Yeah. We're starting to see some pilot programs in the most, I would say, remote counties. So in my latest conversations with the Starlink folks, I want to say there was 2 counties in North Carolina. I don't want to say it because I don't want to get the people excited if I get it wrong. But there was 2 counties that we were looking at that, we're saying it's not tangible to do an excessive amount of underground things, either because of the geology there or just the remoteness of the households. And what I didn't understand, and it was a very long call because they had explained it to me from a very elementary level. It's in my head, I was thinking you put a couple big satellites up there and it falls around. They're like, no, these are lots of little satellites. So just the nature of launching that many satellites and syncing them up takes time. And they were, that week they had been launching some out of Canaveral in Florida, and said, if you think about what it would take to do this all over the country and even just in North Carolina, how many of those satellites, so there's no dead space. So it can follow. It's got the capability to follow it, but when it goes out of its realm, another one has to be there to pick up that signal. And they said that just takes a lot of time. And so we're actively in conversations with them. But what we've done so well is we haven't picked a favorite. I would say North Carolina's been very good to not pick a favorite type of deployment. We will say, hey, if line of sight works where you live, let's do it. If running overground makes more sense along power lines, we're going to help with that, and that accelerator program is a big part of that. If underground fiber works, that's obviously the ideal scenario, so a tree doesn't fall on it, and you have to...
Right. So all of these different money numbers that you're throwing at me and how much the state is spending on this, that's agnostic about the technology? So in other words, that can apply to any form of rolling out?
Yeah. And ideally, a lot of that comes down to the provider, and they get scored in the criteria. There's dozens of criteria that they get scored on. One is cost per pass. So obviously, some of the overground stuff or I say above ground stuff is cheaper, but the reliability may not rank as high. It may not be quite as reliable as the underground. Then you look at, okay, what fiber's already there and just needs to be lit up. I use the term lit up. It's dark fiber, it's dead. Going in and that's something we're putting a huge focus on with our municipalities and counties, are going in and say, okay, what infrastructure do you have that maybe just not be utilized right now? Really a lot of the above ground and along the power lines, it was probably one of the most controversial things when it's come to broadband. Originally there were some co-ops that were extremely against it. And I think there was a lot of miscommunication on the front end of how the cost sharing would work with pole replacement. But pretty much it's $100 million in a fund, and Representative Sain out of Lincoln County has been working on this for a long time. If they're replacing that pole, so the lifespan's getting near the end of that pole, they're going to have to replace it anyway. We've got the fund to help them replace the pole if they will partner with a provider to run fiber along that line. And as you know, our co-op serves some of the most rural parts. Where I grew up, we had REA. It was Rutherford Electric back in the day. I'm not sure what the name is now, but Rutherford Electric out of Forest City there, and it's been a great power provider. But if that program had been 20 years ago, would we have been able to utilize that and get high-speed fiber along those poles? I don't know, but we hope going forward in the future we can utilize that.
What about cell service? Because I don't know if everyone listening understands this, but 5G, when it's good, is way faster than what you can afford to pay, even on fiber, right? I was out at a house that someone was selling, and I was helping her look at it, yeah. And I saw a cell tower, and I said, "What, does my T-Mobile service reach?" Yes, it does. It's 5G. I got 500 megabits download.
That's
okay,
incredible.
Which is 5 times as much as what I can get off of the service I'm paying for on RiverStreet's fiber service. So if you have access to a good 5G cell antenna, that's probably one of your most efficient ways to go. But it's really spotty.
It's really spotty, and obviously here in the mountains, people like looking at the mountains. They like looking at, and we've had some really good or really high demand, I'll say. And there's been a lot of pushback on where to put those towers. I mean, you're going to see them. I mean, it's a structure, so you're going to see it. And we've identified some locations. I'll give Lake Lure as a good example. I do have that part of Rutherford County, and they're one that comes to mind because we've actually got a kind of a proposed plan out there. Everyone says we want better signal. Everyone says it's a public safety concern, and then you pick a location, everybody goes, "Oh, not there, not there, not there. You can't do it there. I'll see it." I was like, "Well, you're gonna see it. I mean, that's just how it is." And you just kind of have to have that social trade-off of, yeah. I mean, you do have to find the right location, and I do think the public good outweighs the aesthetics of it, especially if it's a public safety concern. And we've considered, and this is a very new conversation now that we've kind of established all these internet deployment programs, is how do we maybe look at some of that same criteria and go in and look at this? I mean, we've been in very initial conversations with some of our telecom companies about, okay, what does a program look like for signal? I mean, there's areas where my grandparents live in Mill Spring right there. I mean, you might as well just turn your phone off when you go there because it's none. And eventually that will be, the public safety concern will outweigh some of the other concerns.
Well, I'm glad you brought up the aesthetic conflict here, because it seems to me, especially with something like 5G, where it's super high bandwidth, but you need a lot more antennas because the signal attenuates really, really quickly, which means you just can't put them up every few miles. You got to put them up every few hundred yards kind of thing. So we probably are going to see more cell towers, not as high maybe.
And that's it. And you know, when we're having these conversations with local elected officials, mostly because they're kind of bringing the projects to us where they need it, because the conversation usually starts around like EMS, police, rescue squad, being able to communicate, saying, "Hey, we've got areas out here that, you know, we can't even get back to dispatch what we're trying to do. We can't even call these things in." And so those conversations usually start around public safety, in my experience. And then when you start talking about an area, people go, "Oh yeah, it's terrible out there, but it'd be better if it was over on their land, not here." So we're working through those, and we've got some really great ideas we're talking about. It's just a matter of how do you convert. It took us a long time to develop the criteria for which someone would apply for those great grants. What criteria makes sense for a telecom to come to us and say, "Hey, we need a site, we need the permitting, we need things like that." They need different things, because a lot of times fiber can be ran in the right of ways and things like that. When you're talking about these towers, oftentimes it's either privately owned land, government owned land, things like that. You have a new set of challenges you have to address.
And someone might have to pay rent to put a
lease
tower
it,
up.
Long-term leasing, exactly. And what happens when that lease runs out? Is the technology even relevant then, or have we moved on to something else?
And we have municipal ordinances that sometimes forbid.
Oh, we have HIDE ordinances. We have ordinances on land use that may prevent a private company from operating there. So there's a lot of different hoops to jump through as to where, you know, on the fiber stuff, we kind of got it figured out with DOT that a lot of times we can operate their right-of-ways, and if it's along the poles, they're already in right-of-ways and things like that. And, on the satellite stuff, you don't even have to deal with the right-of-ways. So it's a new set of challenges we're going to have to address.
You know, we could talk about this all day. It's
an onion. It's a lot of layers to it.
I've been fascinated. One of the first stories I wrote when I took over the news department of an alternative weekly, like 30 years ago, was about the internet. You know, and so for me, the subject has no end of avenues to explore. But we got to move on. So the next thing I wanted to ask you was, what's a realistic goal, a time frame for Polk County, for everybody realistically who wants decent internet to have it?
Yeah, and I think we've set and the timeline starts when the contracts are when they're signed, and so I've tried to, and we'll be doing some more op-eds and things to let people know that the money was allocated last year, but we've really just been sitting around waiting on Treasury and DC to make this ruling that they're hopefully going to make this week. So now we can get those signed, and that 2-year time frame starts. That'll reach, like I said, in Polk County, we're hoping for 3,500 out of the 5,500 households, but 5,500 is a big percentage. When you're talking about 19,000 people in a county, 5,500 is a decent percentage that we haven't reached yet. So of that percentage unreached, we're going to reach over half of them with this round, and then from there, we hope once we get it narrowed down to 20-something hundred households in the county, that we can look at the CAB program and say, okay, where which providers are close. We don't want to reinvent the wheel. Realistically, it just makes more sense to partner with somebody close. And we've got some great providers here, and they've been great to work with. Like I said, if the commissioners here can make a $250,000 investment and the taxpayers get $13 million in benefit, that was kind of a no-brainer when we took that and said, please, we'd love to see that. And it helps the score, and it gives the provider more confidence to invest more of their money. So of that money, I think I want to say the number is around $8 million that the provider will be putting in just in Polk County. So you extrapolate that out over 100 counties, most of which are much larger than Polk County. You've seen a huge private sector investment, but I don't think you would have seen that without the state stepping up and saying, we're willing to make it worth your while to do business here. Because, again, there's a lot of things we want. This is something we need. And so I think a realistic time frame, you're looking at 2 years on this first rollout, 2 to 6 years, something like that, on the CAB program, which is the next round. And then the accelerator program will be after that. So I would like to think in 5 years we've at least broken ground on all the areas we need to get to. That would be my optimistic hope.
5 years. And from my recollection of what it took for RiverStreet to wire Saluda with its underground, it took longer than we expected. The geology turned out to be denser rock.
Oh, yes. And those are things you really, even the providers, these things are all moving very quick. A lot of these are issues you have to deal with when you're on the ground. And you can plan and do all the studies you want, but living in the mountains, you really never know what you're going to run into out there. And the other big issue we run into, timeline, which is why it's such kind of a loose timeline. We're not the only state competing for these resources like fiber and talent. There's only so many vendors out there that know how to install this stuff. There's only so many people that work in the field. There's only so much fiber you can buy at one time in many cases. Some of the bigger ones have stockpiled more, I'm sure. And you've got really a competition among states now. Everyone received federal money this last time, and we weren't the only ones that, have needs for internet. I'm sure our neighbors, South Carolina, Georgia, Tennessee, Kentucky, they're all wanting to expand fiber too. So one reason we have such aggressive timelines is so that when we get these contract issued, our providers can go out and be competitive in bidding out these contracts internally and getting the folks out here to lay the fiber, to buy enough of it to do the entire project. So those are things that have to be in back of our mind when we're making these timelines. And we expedited that bill very fast. It's just been kind of frustrating waiting around on some of the red tape to be cut and things that, frankly, we can't control. And there's been some what I would call frivolous lawsuits against our state department, against the Department of Information Technology for the decisions they made and how they awarded those contracts. There were some lawsuits. What I find funny is one of the lawsuits was in an area that vendor won. And so it really shows that a lot of those things are done, and we're cleaning that up in legislation, just kind of frivolous protests and lawsuits.
You're just talking about like one vendor who didn't win is unhappy that they didn't win.
Yeah, and one thing we're changing, and actually I'll be filing it in an agency bill, is when someone protests the decision. So they're saying, I don't agree with who won that contract. We're protesting it. They have to provide us reasons for that. It can't just be, I don't like that vendor, I'm protesting it. That's my competition. I don't want them to get it. It's not a good enough reason to slow down the whole process. What we're doing is it won't be public to their competitors, but they have to submit their internal data to us saying why they already serve that area. Because sometimes somebody may serve a little bit over here and say, oh, well, I've already got that area covered. Nobody else can be a provider there.
Is this just a kind of holdover from the era when basically every telecom company had a monopoly?
Yeah. And now you've got areas where it's kind of conflicted of who's better to serve that area. All we're saying is if you're going to slow the whole process down on implementation, you have to provide us your reason why you think you're serving that area better than the person we selected. Right now, that was, that's one of the frustrating parts is the lawsuits and the protests and everything else. And the protest period is a necessary thing because, if our data is wrong, we want to know it. But we don't want to tell someone, you have to give us your data and we're going to turn and give it to your competitor. So what we're tuning in with legislation is how to keep that private so that they're more willing to share information with us and we can make better decisions.
All right. Well, let's take the whole lessons learned from government coming around to realize that people need decent internet and that the free market's not going to do it all on their own because it's expensive. Let's apply that to some other issues. My third question for you was, what else are you working on? And I'm going to sort of answer it for you. It's just because this week is the big news.
I'm working on everything.
The big news is that North Carolina is finally going to expand Medicaid.
Yeah.
Why did it take so long for North Carolina to get on?
Well, I say yes. We'll see next week when the vote happens. It's really one. So we'll back up 10 years because this is a huge contextual. This is a decade long, well, longer than a decade, but really since we'll say early 2010s, we had a single payer system that was truly what you think of when you think Medicaid. It was a fee for service, and that was what I would say was at our most broken point. It was no one really had a private provider or a primary care physician because it was a fee for service. We've now moved to a managed care system, which is what we frankly made the system much better in my opinion. Before, it was the state was the payer to where let's just say you get a sore throat and you go to the doctor. Inevitably, the state was getting billed for that. The hospital was billing back for that because there's a fee for service. You had that service, the fee was charged, and the rates were super inconsistent. So let me explain Medicaid transformation. Medicaid transformation says you have the option to shop private companies in the state. I believe there was 5 plans originally. There may be more now. But it was right when I got there. I believe in 2019 was when transformation was implemented. And it says if you go to the doctor, you can have a primary care physician and private insurance that the state pays a set marginal rate for every person on the program. It was good for 2 reasons. One, it got people with a primary care physician they felt comfortable going to instead of going to the hospital when they had a sore throat because they didn't have insurance. So you got an insurance card just like anybody working for a company that provides it. You go and give them that card, and they bill your insurance company. We subsidized the amount, the state subsidized the amount at a set rate. It was really good because it helped budget, and we knew what that number was relatively going to be. And if it's going to cost this much, we got this many people on it, we have a pretty good idea what it's going to cost. That was transformational in a lot of ways. The question is, so when we say expand Medicaid now, it's not the same expansion we're talking about 20 years ago or 10 years ago, even 10 years ago or even 5 years ago. This is expanding the amount of people who can qualify for the transformation. So it's really an expansion of transformation as opposed to an expansion of single-payer Medicaid like you think back in the day. The reason you saw a group, and I was one of them, that had an issue this time, we had talked about a workforce requirement in there for that was the biggest conversation we had. CMS, which it signs off on the state plans, the plans we put forward. It's federal, but they're the ones that sign off on it. Kind of, you can think of it as the federal DHHS. They said they will not do anything with a work requirement. So I believe some states, and I don't want to. I think it's Georgia, the one I'm thinking about. That we've looked at a bunch of other states how they did it. Are actually in some legal challenges right now to say, does the state have the ability to require that you're searching for a job or a work search requirement or things like that, like we do with a lot of other programs, by the way. We're not reinventing the wheel. My thing was, if we're committing the kinds of money we are, if we're in charge of administering it, if the percentages in DC change, really it's us that have to kick people off of this program. At the very least, can we set the standards for how we do this? And so really the opposition was, we wanted to challenge them a little bit on that and say, if you're expecting us to pay this, and if you're expecting us to be the administrator of the program, can we have some say-so in the requirements we put in there? And they were telling us no. So we just wanted to challenge them a little bit. I think we would have had a really good shot in court. And I'd still like to see us maybe do a lawsuit over that.
Well, I'm a little bit puzzled by that argument, though, because the Medicaid expansion, as I understand it, 90% of it's paid for by the federal government, and in the plan, and the plan that North Carolina has worked out is the other 10% will be covered by the hospitals. So it won't actually be a drain on the North Carolina government budget at all.
Yeah. So the way it works is, and we're on the hook for that 10%. Let's just say something goes, we are on the hook for 10% of that. And the problem is, we are the ones that would have to kick people off of it. And they say the federal government, there's some clawbacks and things. If the federal government came in tomorrow, let's say leadership change, let's say something happens and they say, we're going to do 80%. That's in a federal budget, that's not necessarily going to break the bank. For us, that's 10% of that whole number is detrimental. We're talking huge numbers. So I think, one, I don't trust that that's never going to change. But that's not what my main opposition was. My main opposition was, I would like to see us do like some other states did and say, if we're going to be the administrator, I don't think anyone should be discouraged from entering or re-entering the workforce because we're providing benefits that a small business would normally provide. We're providing it without a workforce requirement. And that's where I kind of sat down with leadership, and we've had a lot of conversations, but this was not like a 30-second conversation. We had some pretty extensive conversations of what other states have done and what I'd like to see us do. The difference is, I believe when some of the other states did it, it was a different CMS that signed off on that. We're not working under the same CMS that they are. And that's where one of the biggest conflicts has been, is this one has not been willing to negotiate with us at the level the previous CMS administration was. So they're the ones, and I forget what it stands for. But pretty much they're the ones that sign off on our plan for expansion. So the best way to describe it is they have to agree to the stipulations we put in place. And I think that changed with the Biden administration. I think that actually there was new leadership there. The previous one said, yeah, the states have the ability to put in a workforce requirement. This one says you do not have the ability to put in a workforce requirement or a work search requirement. And we're saying, we already do that for our unemployment benefits, however flawed it is, and it's extremely flawed. The work search requirement is loose at best. It needs reform altogether. But I said, if we're already able to do this with other pastors, why can't we do it with this one? And I think it's something that we would have, a very good leg to stand on in court. But,
So you're happy more or less with where this is going?
I'm not happy about two aspects. One, that we're tying it to a lot of other things. So just the way politically it's worked out, Medicaid is now tied into a larger agreement with certificate of need reform. It's not an all-out repeal the way I understand it, but it's a pretty heavy move toward repealing certificate of need in North Carolina, which is frankly not connected to Medicaid at all. We've tied a lot of other federal funds that legally are not tied to Medicaid at all. We've tied them to being connected to Medicaid. I'd like to debate them all on their own merits because they're not related. I would like to debate them on their own merits. That's one of my biggest issues with the latest agreement.
Okay, but no agreement ever makes everybody 100% happy, right? I'm saying when it comes time to send it to Governor Cooper's desk, and he will sign it, you'll be content that this is not a bad compromise?
I'll probably still be a no vote if we can't get to the workforce requirement, or at least a heavier negotiating hand with CMS. And we've been, and this is, again, not a conversation that's happened overnight. This has been ongoing for a long time now, and I think we're in a really good position to litigate this and win and have a really good shot. And I'm not content that we're not taking that step. If we're asking taxpayers to be on the hook, I'm not that content. And the hospitals are. So I also represent very different hospitals than a lot of other people in the state making these decisions. So this is what I've been told. Please do not, and this is from the hospitals. So this is the hospital point of view. Do not expand Medicaid just to kill us on CON reform. Certificate of need reform. So what I'm a little nervous about with tying certificate of need reform to Medicaid, and that's what the deal is. I mean, that is the deal right now. If you do that, I'm scared it's going to lead to regional monopolies in health care. So right now, I'll use Henderson as a good example. Henderson County, it's definitely bigger than Polk County, and it's got two large, not massive, but medium-sized providers. that I fear a all-out repeal of certificate of need would have a very negative effect on. I don't want hospital conglomerates to control entire regions and eliminate healthcare competition altogether. The whole thought behind repealing certificate of need altogether is to increase competition. I'm scared there may be some unintended consequences there we're not totally analyzing, and that's what the hospitals agree with.
I think a lot of people, though, are going to find this debate a little bit too dense for them. I mean, let's face it, there are 11 states who haven't yet expanded Medicaid under the Affordable Care Act. And we're one of them, and now we're on the cusp of doing it. And so that's going to help 600,000 people in North Carolina get access to health insurance. Do you really want to be the one saying no, even though it's taken a long time, and this government's budget has been held up for years at a time because of this issue? Is this really kind of the hill you want to die on kind of thing?
That's why I really don't understand, and I've voiced my concerns on this, why we don't put it in there and just go to court and see if it could get passed. Because to me, we would have a much larger consensus, and we did actually get some more votes on the amendment that I wish we could have made stronger. And it pretty much, the amendment, and when I say the amendment, I mean the workforce requirement amendment we put in there. It pretty much says we're going to ask if we can put a workforce requirement in there. Mine would have actually said put it in there, and if they want these people to have health care, they're gonna accept what we're putting in there, and we can get the best of both worlds by not deterring anyone, by not having that work determined in there, and we can get this signed into law. And I don't really understand the lack of willingness to negotiate on that. I don't understand why there's so much pushback. Most people, if you ask, do you think someone should at least be looking, if they're an able-bodied person? Now, some people cannot work. I understand that. Either it's a health reason or it's a disability or something like that. They just cannot work. This would not apply to them. These are able-bodied adults that have to at least be in the job market looking. And I don't understand the pushback on that. I don't know if there's another motive.
Well, my understanding is that the usual reason why people oppose that is that it creates another layer of bureaucracy, administrative cost that really isn't justified given the benefits of just extending a service to more people. I mean, okay, you were up at Lake Lure a few weeks ago, and someone asked you about Medicaid, I think, and you said, I'm just paraphrasing, that business owners will tell you that they like the idea of being able to offer benefit to potential employees, and if you take that away by expanding Medicaid, then they can't compete for the employees anymore. I got to say, that was a pretty unusual argument I had not heard.
Yeah, so we passed the small business health care plans. Myself and a couple, I believe I was a primary on that one back when it got signed into law. It got signed into law. And one of the big arguments there was that small businesses could offer more benefits. That was the whole reason we did it. And I said, I feel like we're kind of shooting ourselves in the foot to say we did that for the reason of small businesses being able to pull together and get on these, being able to offer benefits. And I said, now we're going in and saying we're kind of kneecapping their hiring ability. And when I'm talking to small business owners, they're saying, government kind of really killed us with how much money we were paying out in unemployment benefits for as long as we did. And we did eventually fix that. For a while, it was $600, $650 tax-free. I said, you got two people living together. That's $1,300 a week. There was no evictions or anything going on. And I said, a lot of that, we had business owners coming to us going, that's $650 tax-free is what we're paying, by the time you take out taxes and things for an entry-level position. And we're like, this is a real deterrent. And I just looked at this as one more deterrent stacked on top that really it would be a super easy fix. And other states have done it. We're not reinventing the wheel. Other states have done this. They were just working with a much different administration than we're working with.
I guess it just seems to me that this is a very old argument, and in my opinion, a kind of a tired argument, that there are lots of people out there who they're just too lazy and they won't work hard if you give them an option of sitting back and not working. And I know there are people who will take advantage of the system. Any system you design, there will always be parasites who want to take something and give nothing back. But is there really that many people that it becomes a financial liability for a state?
And we don't know the answer to that. I really do not know the answer to that. My guess would be I don't see the harm in putting it in there. And if I don't understand where the pushback's coming from, I guess, because we already do this for other programs like unemployment. There's a workforce or there's a work search requirement. Again, it's not a good one, and it needs to be reformed. I just don't understand what the argument against an able-bodied person, them telling us you shouldn't make an able-bodied person have some responsibility to get these benefits. And that was a message dating way back. If you want to accept government assistance, you need to at least be trying to re-enter the workforce. And I just don't understand the argument against it.
Well, again, this is a very difficult question to answer because how many people out there are actually going to be taking advantage of the system?
And again, this is tied to, we're talking about the content of the Medicaid expansion. This is also tied to CON, SAVE Act, HASP funding, other thing, a part of this agreement. And what's so strange for me is, it's like, I agree with this, I don't agree with that, I agree with this, I agree with that part of it. We want the HASP funding. It's legally not tied to Medicaid like it was advertised. We could issue that to the hospitals and it would be fine. The SAVE Act has some issues I would like to see dealt with. That's expanding the scope of practice for nurses of various qualifications, which is a super controversial thing in Raleigh. That's tied into this bill. So you can't even look at Medicaid in a vacuum without looking at 4 other major healthcare issues that are extremely controversial, even within caucuses, are extremely controversial. So I don't like debating them as a whole, and that's why when somebody asks, "Are you on board with this agreement?" I'm like, I mean, if I'm on board with 1/3 of the agreement, am I on board with the whole thing? Because it's been, I don't like debating them for huge, very different policy topics as one agreement.
Would you like us, as a country, to stop passing big, huge bills with 1,500 different pieces?
Oh my gosh.
Because this is a classic journalistic gotcha, right? You voted against a bill, and you have to explain why you voted against it. But there's so many pieces,
and it may be one line in there that has huge implications for something else, but you agree with the other 10,000 lines. But that one in there is a really poison thing for the whole bill.
When it comes to Medicaid, we're talking about expanding a service to cover 600,000 people, and it just seems to me like, that's a good thing.
Yes.
It's a big thing, and maybe it's not perfect, but surely we could agree that this is probably worth whatever imperfections.
Yeah, and we've come such a long way. The transformation side of it, and I can't express this enough, how different it is now versus 2010. And that's why I frankly there was no scenario I would have even considered it 10 years ago, because it was truly a single payer system that, frankly, we had no idea what we were paying. We had no idea. If you went to one hospital and said, what are you charging us for this service? And what are you charging the same exact service over here? There was no standard to it. And now we've got where we're so close, and that's the frustrating part. And by the votes, it will get pushed through, but we're going to keep fighting for this thing to get in there. And frankly, I don't know what the judicial process would look like. I assume it would go to I assume it's something that could end up in the federal Supreme Court if we were to do it. And again, I think this is going to set, not just for us, I think it's going to open up the door for more states to have success doing it if we were able to get this put in there. And again, it's a timing issue, because exactly what I'm proposing was allowed a couple years ago. And it was signed off on and fine. And like you said, some of those states were able to do it. I think they've been met with some lawsuits on the other side, but it's just extremely frustrating that something that seems so common sense to most people is just getting met with such pushback in D.C. And I just can't wrap my head around it. And I think we would have a really good shot to litigate it and get it implemented.
Right. Well, I guess it'll all be done relatively soon, right?
That seems to be the notion. It seems to be moving very, very fast, and I assume we'll caucus on it pretty hard this coming week. And you got. There's a lot going on behind the scenes, I'm sure, as far as between the governor's office and the leadership in the House and Senate. But we've been, it's been moving very fast. I will say that.
All right. I know we're basically out of time, but is there anything else you want to talk about briefly, or just list the things that you're working on?
Yes. We're doing some reforms when it comes to really like to look at some foster care reform. Obviously, it's a very convoluted system, and a lot of foster parents are extremely frustrated right now. So in early childhood development, we're investing, I think it was $800 million last time, is a huge number we're investing. We want to keep investing in, especially in rural early childhood development. We know if we can get to these kids early and make sure they have those basic skills, that it's going to increase their chance in the future. the tier system. I'm always looking at that because we base a lot of grant funding we do off the tier system. It's very antiquated in a lot of the metrics we use that I think we need to go back and take a look at. And a student right to know bill that I'll probably be filing sometime in the near future. It's pretty much a disclosure. It's passed unanimously in a bunch of states to where, and I think I've got it set as the sophomore year in high school, students are disclosed what are the highest demand fields in your region. Where can you go to get that degree or certification? How much does that degree or certification cost, and what can you expect to make coming out of it? And the whole talking point, for lack of better words, is we can forgive student debt all day long, but it doesn't address the root problem. It doesn't, at the federal level, they can forgive it every 10 years. But if you've got people going into fields that are either fields that are going out of demand or not in demand in the region they want to live in or that they're from and want to move back to, then you're gonna keep having problems. And we want students to know on the front end, if they want to stay in their region, here's the jobs that are paying good money. Here's where you go to get that certification or degree, and here's what you can expect to make coming out. And I think Virginia just did one, and it passed, I believe, unanimously. And some other states have done it too. So we're hoping to have a lot of success, and we're shopping it across the aisle right now, and we think we're getting very good responses there.
Well, as a father of a 16-year-old, I'm very interested to hear that.
Yes. Okay. So it's been very well received by students and parents alike.
All right. Well, look, thanks so much for taking this time. I hope that we can talk again.
Yes, we can always do a follow-up. And later in the session, I hope to know a lot more about a lot of these things. We're in the very beginning stages of the budget process, so the House starts with the budget this year. We'll send it to the Senate. The governor will put his budget out probably end of this coming week. So by the time we talk again, we'll either have a budget passed, hopefully, or be in the negotiating stages where we have a good idea of what we're looking at.
Thanks so much.
Perfect, James. Thank you.
That's it for this episode. I'm really glad that Jake brought up his interest in foster children because that's the subject of my next episode. I'll be talking with Kim Wilson, who oversees foster programs in the county. Thanks for listening to this episode, and if you need to get a hold of me, you can email me at jamesh@folklore.com.